Welcome everybody. If I could ask everybody to take their seats so we get started. We're going to welcome you, but we're also going to try and be brief so we can keep to the schedule we've designed for this day. My name is Tim Profeta, for those who don't know me. I'm the director of the Nicholas Institute and really excited about the day we have before us. I do want to start by thanking both my colleagues, Kate Kochnick and Jen Weiss, and the Great Plains Institute staff, Doug Franzlitz, Jess Jennings, and Jill Rook, who are doing incredible work outside to make sure this all runs smoothly. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to come today. I think this is it's an exciting group of people who have come together to look at these issues, and I think it's because we're all interested in, excited about this topic. As we look at the issues in the PJM region and in the utility sector generally, we're really looking at a sector that's changing rapidly, and I think that's central to why we have so much interest today. We have change happening rapidly in how we generate power in this region, with low natural gas prices, renewables cheapening, demand for low carbon technologies from some consumers coming into the market. We also have the policies shifting pretty rapidly. We had the removal of a policy thought to be coming to the region through the Federal Clean Power Plan, but states now acting on carbon issues, on other priorities, on sort of baseload technologies, on grid modification, on rate structures, and kind of filling the void but creating a very interesting changing landscape. And then we have the sector's participants changing, and things like some of the big IOUs taking their own initiatives on a lot of these issues, aggressive carbon targets coming in for companies like AEP, who we'll hear from. But the second concept is that change is actually pretty difficult and hard to adjust to. This is a sector that's used to certainty and planning, and it creates uncertainty for those who are participating in the markets. It threatens entrenched interests, of course, and it pushes a lot of us outside our comfort zone. So that's why it's interesting, but it's a difficult time. It also is a time of great opportunity. As we look at the changes coming forward, it gives us the opportunity and possibilities to address some of the issues in the sector, to remake the system, to correct the past failings. So we have a great day here today designed for us with speakers and panels from those who are managing and assessing and even creating the changes that are happening in the sector. So I'm looking forward to the conversations and to learning from all of you who are assembled here today as we look at the region and the changing sector. But again, I'd really like to thank Great Plains Institute for their partnership in this. We've had this partnership now for at least 2 years, maybe 3, and I think it's really, there's never been an organization that's more easy and fun to work with than people like Doug Scott at Great Plains. So, Doug, thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and good morning, everybody. And I want to give Tim right back the thanks and how wonderful it is to be working with the Nicholas Institute. We've been working, it's almost 3 years now, working with states in the PJM region on energy and environmental issues, and working on all of those change issues that Tim has talked about. I also want to thank folks from both our staff and the staff of the Nicholas Institute, who, as you know, these things don't just come together. There's a tremendous amount of work, and folks in both staffs have done a great job with that, so thank you. And again, thank you, all of you, for being here as well. We're very excited by the turnout, both all of you in the audience as well as the tremendous lineup of speakers that we have. I think that's a testament to how important these issues are. They're very important issues in PJM right now that are going to have some significant implications for the rest of the country, and so it's great to be able to explore those here with you today. And also, it's interesting to see how much is going on at both the state and the local levels. This is a very exciting time to be working on these kinds of issues, and you're starting to see so much. It's always happened, but it's starting to get a little bit more attention to all of the changes that are going on at the state, local level, and with utilities and co-ops and munis and others who are working in this field. So it's really good to see how those different jurisdictions and the work that they're doing is going to impact these issues going forward. So we're very excited by the conference. We're very excited that all of you are here today, and we're especially excited to be able to kick it off with our keynote speaker. We're very honored to have Commissioner Robert Powelson from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission here with us today. Commissioner Powelson was nominated to FERC by President Trump in May of 2017 and confirmed by the U.S. Senate in August of 2017. He came to FERC from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, where he served since June 2008 and led that commission as chairman from February 2011 to May of 2015. Under Commissioner Powelson's leadership, Pennsylvania ratepayers have had an active voice in issues such as nuclear power production, renewable investment, and broadband deployment, infrastructure development, and work on issues such as cybersecurity, all kinds of issues that we're going to be talking about today and in the time going forward. Commissioner Powelson also served as president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or NARUC, where he was also a member of the board of directors. He served as chairman of the NARUC Committee on Water and represented the Water Committee and NARUC's Task Force on Climate Policy. He was active in NARUC activities, including critical infrastructure and nuclear waste disposal. And I got to know Commissioner Powelson when I was with the Illinois Commission, and he was with the Pennsylvania Commission. Always a tremendous collaborative person to work with, always somebody who was very well steeped in the issues, somebody who really did his homework, very knowledgeable. And so we're very pleased not only that he was able to ascend to NARUC and from a state commissioner position, and also that we're really excited that he's here with us today. And he's excited and is going to be for a long time because at least until February, the Philadelphia Eagles are the world champions of football. So, Commissioner Powelson, it was great that you're here. Great to see you again. Please come on up and say a few words to the group. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doug, for that incredible introduction. I felt for a moment there you were on my compensation committee, and I really do appreciate it. And I'm proud to report, Doug, I'm sure you're a proud Chicago Bears fan, and my brother-in-law's nephew, Ryan Winslow, who is one of the top 5 punters in the country from the University of Pittsburgh, will be playing hopefully next year for the Chicago Bears. Now, we tried to get him to Philadelphia, but didn't happen. So good morning, everyone, and I'm going to kind of set up the conversation here today. I was just back in Pennsylvania yesterday, and it's interesting. We look at the history of electric competition and the value that it's delivered in these markets. I see my friends from PJM here, and the collaborative that has taken place in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, and more recently in Texas. And how these markets have evolved. Now, there are some of us, when we talk about the evolution of these markets, I once was quoted as saying the PJM RPM capacity market is almost like the spaceship mirror. You remember the one that had all the moving parts that we had to capture in space? And I use that with all sincerity to PJM. I mean, we look at the reliability pricing model and the value that it's delivered in these markets. And I think, as one of my colleagues at NARUC said, and continues to be a devout supporter of these markets, Chairman Barry Smitherman, you look at the experience of electric restructuring, it's arguably, for any students of economics here, it's arguably one of the greatest wealth transfers to take place in our nation, and the benefits that it's yielded customers. Now, I look out in the room. There are some of you who are devout market capitalists, but sometimes act like monopolies. and we're going to work with you there. The FERC has a 12-step program, and some of you may not like it, but let's look at where the FERC is headed. And I'll start with the backdrop of the DOE. I had the Freudian slip at one event, the DOA NOPR. But with respect to that docket, I think the FERC respectfully, from rule of law to how we kind of synchronize with next steps, is we said, look, we're not going to do 202, and we're probably not going to use the, well, that wasn't an option at the time. I was thinking, what's the latest, the federal, the war production, yeah. I was curious about that because I studied the War Production Board. You remember that? Anybody that old in the room? So I said maybe we'll have them regulate it. We'll bring back the War Production Board, and that'll be the regulatory agency set up to handle this national security event. Anyway, I think my colleagues and I, under Chairman McIntyre's leadership, we handle this in a way that we have an ability to look at this issue. One, I should say this in all sincerity, with a holistic approach to the markets. Holistic to me is, one, not picking winners and losers. Two, not creating moral hazards in these markets. Three, having a serious conversation about the value of certain resources and their attributes. Okay? That's pretty straightforward. What it's not about is creating subsidies for uneconomic resources that ratepayers are going to have to pay for again after restructuring. The reason I bring that up is we have this little problem right now. There are some in the room who don't remember the tenets and the history behind electric restructuring. And unfortunately, I happen to be at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as the historian and the guardian of those markets. And I will not compromise in my approach to dealing with these markets. So I apologize for the fire and brimstone here this morning, but I think Joe Kelleher, to his credit, when he was the chairman of the commission, had a great quote in one of his speeches, quoting the great Winston Churchill back in 1947, where he said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for our others." Well, that could be said about competitive markets here in the U.S., but I'm proud to say that I think competition policy in general is alive and well at the FERC, and it's alive and well back in my home state. Pennsylvania is going to be celebrating, I believe, a 25-year anniversary of the 1996 Electric Restructuring Act, signed into law by Governor Tom Ridge. And what an amazing success story for consumers. You know, we're looking at states now like Nevada, and we're looking at the organic growth of markets in the western part of the country with the energy and balance market, the expansion of the Southwest Power Pool. And if anybody in this room who remembers the infamous California energy crisis, if you were today to predict where we are with these markets in the West, I don't think anybody could have predicted that. You know, to think that potentially the Bonneville Power Authority would be talking about markets, it's amazing, and it speaks to consumers' ability to have choice, and it speaks to what I consider to be the evolving landscape in our energy market. I think the previous speaker before Doug talked about this tectonic shift taking place in our bulk power system. Last year in this country, 10% of our energy dispatch came from renewable energy. I've often been quoted that you don't have to have an MBA from the Wharton Business School to make this prediction, but probably in the next 5 years, we'll see another 2 to 5% growth in renewables on the bulk power system. By 2025, that number looks something like 18 to 20% of dispatch. Why do I bring that up? Because in this conversation about baseload, and baseload is like trying to define managed care. It's got like 15 different definitions. It depends on who you spoke to last. When we talk about baseload and staying away from creating moral hazards and picking winners and losers in these markets, that we are seeing a cleaner, more efficient delivery, and some would argue, as one well-heeled lawyer said to me, that gas isn't base load. Now, if you're from Pennsylvania or Texas and you make a statement like that, you are immediately put on a proverbial curve. In fact, you could have your law license revoked. But I had that said to me once, that gas is not base load. But going back to my earlier point about having that MBA from the Wharton Business School, or Doug, in your case, Northwestern, another great business school, Kellogg, that look at the charts, look at the numbers tell the story, and the policies behind what states have done, my state in particular, you know, adopting a renewable portfolio standard, having a statewide energy efficiency goal. And these things are working remarkably well, and customers are embracing it. We're seeing environmental gains. So we're here talking about PJM. I wish I had the chart, but Gene's here from PJM, and the chart looks something like this. From 2005 to today, you've seen a 32% reduction in NOx, SOx, and mercury across the PJM footprint. That's with no clean power plant, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing embedded in there is probably the MATS boiler rule, okay? 32% reduction in NOx, SOx, and mercury. I would consider that to be market-based decarbonization. It's working. We're not building 1,200 megawatt cathedrals anymore in PJM. We're building 1,000 megawatt state-of-the-art efficient gas plants. And by the way, they're not resilient, by the way. I'm told that by all these national security experts. Again, let me reiterate. We're building gas plants in my state right over top of wellheads, okay? So when some people hire these these prolific cyber experts, or you hear from a NERC report that the greater Pittsburgh region doesn't have adequate pipeline capacity, I mean, really? Mom may have raised fat kids here, but we're not stupid, okay? And I share that with you because we're dealing with all this hyperbole, but we're not looking at the reality of where the market's headed. And more recently, with the actions taken by the FERC on battery storage, where if you look at an NRDC report where we could have 50 gigawatts of battery storage in the market by 2030, that's going to be a reality. We're going to see RTOs and ISOs begin to look at pricing mechanisms for battery storage. We're going to see, as we're seeing now, in terms of cost curves coming down for battery storage, it's going to play an ever-increasing role in this power dispatch system. And I think it's a good thing, again, for consumers, because let me just go through some of the stats here in PJM. So according to our State of the Market report, staff found that last year, PJM prices, we want to have the conversation about prices, were the lowest they've been since the RTO was formed back in 1999. Okay? Not only do we have lower power prices, but greenhouse gas emissions from power plants have gone down, as I mentioned. A recent report found that U.S. carbon dioxide emissions have declined 14% since 2005, with natural gas obviously as one of the single largest reasons for that. You know, one of the other factoids, which is amazing, it's this EIA data, but for the first time in our country since 1970, the U.S. power sector in this country admitted less CO2 than the transportation sector. So it speaks to an evolution of, again, where our bulk power system is headed. And needless to say, I think this energy landscape, it's an exciting time to be a commissioner at the FERC, working with state commissions and governors from Republicans and Democrats alike, addressing some of these issues. I think it's also important to mention that old, inefficient power plants need to retire, okay? You can't have a market when you're sending wrong price signals to people that need to enter and exit. That's a whole nother seminar. That will be, I guess we'll save that for next year. But there are, as I said earlier, according to PJM State of the Market report, over 32,000 megawatts have retired between 2011 and 2020. And the majority of those retirements, ladies and gentlemen, 77.3% of those retirements are all coal-fired steam units whose average age is 54 years. So nobody in the C-suite of the company is looking to do a boiler retrofit on a 54-year-old asset. okay? Going back to the Wharton Business School conversation. And so these are kind of the changes taking place. Let me also give you another factoid coming from Pennsylvania, that this is just, if I would have told you this 5 years ago, you would have been like, no, I don't believe that. So ready for this? The average day-ahead price for gas at the Leidy Hub, which is in northeastern Pennsylvania, over the past 12 months has been trading between $1.21 per MMBTU, a discount of more than $1 to $2.41 per MMBTU off the average day-ahead price at Louisiana's Henry Hub. Things are changing rapidly. Shale is obviously, as we go to many different events and conferences and talk about the shale revolution, shale is really driving some tremendous outcomes in the market. It's been beneficial to the environment. It's been beneficial to harnessing renewable development. And obviously, I can wear my former hat. It's been incredibly successful in Pennsylvania with wealth creation and helping local communities, land use preservation, on and on and on. That's for the other group. I also should note here that we're seeing a lot of changes. As I mentioned, this 10% dispatch last year in our bulk power system from renewable energy sources. You're looking at renewables are the fastest growing source of electricity generation with annual increases of 2.9% to 3.2%. I was amazed more recently at some of the RFPs that have come back in Colorado from Xcel Energy. Anybody catch the article in the New York Times? I want you to think about that as we were kind of growing renewables from the startup of states that adopted renewable portfolio standards, that if you were to say 10 years ago that you would see wind coming in at $18 a megawatt hour. Anybody in this room, we would have, 10 years ago, you got to go back in the time machine, that we could be putting $1.81 a kilowatt hour wind on the grid. Anybody want to take that one? Yeah, I won't. I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, that is amazing. $2.21 per kW with storage on top of that. So these are the trends that we're seeing, and that's in a vertically integrated market. And I think it's in a really exciting time, is whether we talk about more recently the developments in the New York ISO. I was with Brad Jones and his team a few weeks ago. The announcement on carbon pricing. Here in New York, they were an early adopter state on battery storage pricing, moving forward with a potential carbon pricing mechanism. It's a reflection of how these markets are responding. But we also have our challenges, and some would argue that within these capacity markets, we have a lot of, quote, around the edges issues that we need to deal with. I can assure you these are around the edges issues that I think the FERC is ideally equipped to work with our states. We have to recognize that states have the ability to adopt renewable portfolio standards, but I'm also becoming more of a cynic in terms of our ability with all these changes to the market. Some of these constructs are getting extremely complicated, and there seems to be an undercurrent from state regulators to want to push back at some of these changes. I also think we're slipping down a very slippery slope where we're putting our thumb on the scale, not us, but others, to try to pick winners and losers in the market. And when we try to pick winners and losers in the market, I think there's some really bad outcomes for consumers, not to mention the overall holistic well-being of these markets. And I think it's also that we have to need to avoid continuous wholesale tweaks, because pretty soon regulators at the state level, policymakers in state capitals, are going to lose confidence as we continue to erode these markets. So with that in mind, we'll take a few questions, Doug, so I can earn my, my honorarium, which is my cup of coffee. And look forward to a few questions. I'm sure David Fine, I see David in the room. David might have a question.
Start here in the back.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tim, for putting this together, and Commissioner Powelson. Before the commission are two possible proposals to reform the capacity market. One was the MOPR X, and the other is PJM's repricing. And my question, I know since it's before you, you can't get into details, but theoretically, is it possible to ask PJM to go back to the drawing board, or does the commission feel this is a binary decision and they need to choose one of the two proposals submitted?
Yeah, so the proverbial PJM jump ball, as we like to call it at 888, I will just say this, I can't give you a good answer on it. I'm trying to Texas two-step here, but I do have, on both sides of the ledger, I do have a little bit of heartache trying to calibrate around both. This speaks to, by the way, a larger issue that I'm going to be very critical with our RTOs, and not to make the people at the PJM table shake their head, but I'm deeply concerned, and I've had this conversation with former Chairman Pat Wood, the whole stakeholder process. There's an erosion of confidence in these stakeholder processes, and I struggle with it. I think there's been some great work done more recently. Speaking of the University of Pennsylvania, the Climate Energy Center has done some great work looking at governance reforms to PJM, and that's something that I think we're going to have a conversation at the FERC about.
Other questions?
Hi, Commissioner. Scott Salmon with Shell. Thanks for your remarks. I'm just wondering if you could comment a little on your example of the Leidy hub and the discount that the gas is selling for there relative to Henry Hub. With FERC looking at both sides of that in terms of the market opportunities in a place like PJM, or looking at the infrastructure challenges on the side of the producers, can you talk a little bit about, do you see that as a problem or a good thing that that discount is there? And it seems to me it's a market distortion, but maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I'll give you a nice shout out. Thank you for your multi-billion-dollar investment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Shell is building an ethylene cracker in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, so thank you. By the way, you wouldn't be building that if we didn't have a plethora of natural gas liquids. And by the way, it's been great for Duquesne, who's providing electric load to that facility. Okay, the question, or what we call the quandary. So I'm a byproduct of Katrina. I was a public utility commissioner when rate caps were rolling off in Pennsylvania. And what I learned back then was the Northeast corridor, the Mid-Atlantic corridor, the New England markets relied heavily on Gulf of Mexico gas. The phenomena, here we are today, that phenomena has shifted where you now have seen plays like Utica and Marcellus displacing Henry Hub pricing and Henry Hub source into the interstate pipeline. Customers have benefited because we've taken basis, the transportation of those molecules into the market. We have been able to provide, I think I didn't show the chart, but the wholesale power price drop have all been another wonderful experience for consumers. Not to mention, if I want to put my Chamber of Commerce hat on here, it's provided reindustrialization for customers that are looking at states like Pennsylvania and Ohio to put a large manufacturing facility, which, by the way, I think is pretty good. Now the issue. 15 million consumers in New England that are less than 200 miles from Leidy source gas are paying some of the highest gas costs in the country. And as we look at the New England ISO 2025 lookout, and we look at some of the risk assessments associated with a potential lack of new capacity being built. By the way, last year in the State of the Market report at the FERC, 763 miles of new pipe went into the ground. Less than 10 miles of new pipe was sourced into New England. Houston, we have a problem. And that problem was made more prevalent during the recent bomb cyclone, where the New England market, now it was the cheapest source, burned about 2 million barrels of oil to keep the lights on in Boston. By the way, a lot of Philadelphians would have been happy about that if it was during the Super Bowl. So setting that up in the sense that we can use that cheap basis and that production to really create stabilization in our wholesale markets. It's almost, you know, it's caused a tremendous price suppression. By the way, I always like to mention this, at LDCs that have to buy gas off the interstate pipeline system, they buy it and they have gas purchase costs that they reconcile with the Public Utility Commission. Anybody want to take a guess across 7 LDCs in Pennsylvania what those numbers look like? I'll give it to you. It's been a 70% reduction in gas purchase costs at the LDC. On top of that is the wholesale reduction on the power side. So really unbelievable opportunity. And the reason I set that up in a long-winded way, the New England problem relying on storage is a problem. In lieu of 30-inch pipe or new capacity, and the fact that we had less than 10 miles of new pipeline capacity built into that market, I think to the credit of the grid operator up there, there is a deep concern about reliability going forward. By the way, to the credit of PJM, this is not about reliability. From reserve margins to orderly retirements, PJM has strong reliability metrics. By the way, if you want to help people at the DOE with that, we'd be glad to set that conversation up. If you want to have this serious conversation, let's look at that in the context of New England is the one area of the country right now where I'm concerned. By the way, I don't regulate ERCOT. Anybody from Texas here? That's a good thing. But a 9% reserve margin this summer going into Texas, it's going to be interesting. So I set that up. I mean, we've got, you know, the proliferation of Marcellus development has been incredible to the state. And I'm not here to promote INGA or AGA. It's not. It's just I've regulated this industry. I've looked at these charts. I look at our State of the Market report. It's a tectonic shift that we haven't seen in probably a decade. John Rosales is in the room. I see him. He's coming at me.
How you doing? Thank you for that presentation. Great. New Jersey, Mike Winka, New Jersey BPU. So you talked about renewable base loads, and so do you, and the price is coming down for solar as well as wind. Do you see a place for distributive in the wholesale market, or are they just playing on the demand side?
I do. I do, and I look again just some of the research I'm doing right now in looking at renewables and where we're headed with battery storage, and what your state's done. I mean, you guys are pretty progressive with looking at grid resiliency and looking at distributed energy resources in the market. So I think, yes, I think you're going to see the markets value these resources, and I think that's an exciting proposition for customers. It's good for the environment too. I don't see a day that sitting through the FERC Tech Conference on this topic, you know, I don't see a day where someone's going to build a 500-home subdivision and they're going to be setting up their own power resource, okay? But, you know, at Princeton, hospitals, maybe some urban areas will look at this in the context of what I saw in Columbus more recently with the Smart City Initiative. These are kind of where I see market opportunities.
Got time for a couple more. Anybody else? Okay.
That's 2 questions.
I know.
Sorry for double dipping, but I didn't see any other hands up. I was curious about how the Commission thinks about the storage tariff revisions that might come in from the different, well, that will come in from the different RTOs, and what level of synchronization the Commission would like to see to facilitate battery proliferation throughout the different wholesale markets.
Great question, and I haven't kind of thought at that level. What's on my plate right now is listening to some of the states with respect to, you know, Ted Thomas represents the OMS states. There was a concern that a one-size-fits-all that would force the hand of a state would, you know, Arkansas wasn't particularly keen on that kind of approach. So I think what we're trying to do in that conversation is look at flexibility for the states. The market synchronization point, I think there'll be, you know, respectfully, I think there might be regional pricing differences. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at the issue in terms of its, all I know now is we've set a homework assignment for all of our RTOs and ISOs to start valuing that resource. And by the way, for those of you that look back to the work that the FERC did on FERC Order 745, I think it was a demonstration of how these markets can value demand-side resources in the market. So very similar experience. Hopefully we don't have to go up to the Supreme Court and have a big fight with EPSA over this. So stay tuned. Take one more question if we have one. All right.
More?
Great.
No?
Well, you have a great panel next. I see John Rosales, Willie Phillips, Andrew Place. Who else do we have? I forget the other individual. I don't know if they're a commissioner or not. I haven't met them. But thank you so much, Doug. Great to be with you.
Thank
and
you.
Hope you have a good session here today.
Thanks, Commissioner.
And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, everyone.